Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. My name is Lori Burris, and I'm the Education Innovation Advisor at LinkedIn Learning, the leading provider of learning online videos. I'll be moderating the discussion and interview today. Today, we are presenting Agents of Change, exploring the superhero role of CIOs or any higher education leader in the next normal with Rae Clemmons. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Don't worry, we'll send out the on-demand recording of this webinar as soon as it's available. Any presentation decks or additional materials will be sent to you as well. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. We'll bring them up during the presentation, and we'll also have time for questions at the end. I encourage social sharing with your audience members, and you can always use the hashtag #HEDLeaders. For those of you just joining us for the first time, welcome, and know that we love hearing from you. Today, the format for the interview is a conversation, a dialogue followed by questions. Now, without further ado, let's hear from Raechelle Clemmons. I'm going to let Rae introduce herself because she's had so many roles. I didn't even know what to put on this slide, but she is a woman of all skills, all trades.
Oh, wow. That's a, I'm not sure all qualifies here, but hi, everybody. Well, I'm Raechelle Clemons. Everybody calls me Rae. I most recently, it says here, was the Vice President of Industry Relations at the Tambellini Group, and Tambellini is a higher ed focused technology analyst firm. But before that, I spent about 15 years on the institutional side. I started my career in California at the Cal State University system on their campus in Hayward, which is now called East Bay, but when I joined, it was Cal State Hayward. And then I went on from there to be a CIO for about a decade at 4 different institutions. And then way back in my past, when I was much younger, I did high tech startups, also in the Bay Area, which is where I'm from. So does that cover the all part, Lori?
Yeah, the many skills. Like I have this kind of picture of an Indian goddess with 8 arms. So one of the things I wanted to know is, how did you evolve into leadership roles in both IT, corporate, and higher ed? How did that come about for you?
You know, I like to say that I tripped into higher education. I sort of accidentally landed there. It found me. I didn't find it exactly. And I think leadership is the same. Over the course of my career, I've tried to do things like, have a normal 9-to-5 job where you go in and you sit down and you work and then you leave at the end of the day. And after about 2 weeks, I get really bored with that. And I start going, oh, I could do that. And I can see this thing that I can change and this other thing. And I just sort of take on these responsibilities. And I've been really lucky that I've had really strong mentors and champions over the years who have recognized my abilities and have tapped me for increasing responsibilities and leadership roles.
Well, that's great, because that sounds like that's mostly a positive experience. I know that for a lot of women, it hasn't been easy being an IT leader, particularly. Do you have any advice for women in the audience who want to move into leadership roles on a campus, or have fears of taking on those roles because of how it might impact them?
So if you want to, I think, as women, I mean, part of why I sort of started in that, just do the job and be happy with that is when I was younger in my career, I sort of had these societal expectations about I shouldn't want success, not that I wouldn't want success, but I shouldn't want to, lead companies or be in these leadership roles. So I think, be unapologetically ambitious, I think is really important. If you are ambitious, just don't apologize for it. Just be that way. And find sponsors and find mentors, because they've been really critical in many of our careers, including mine. In terms of the fear, if you love what you do, I mean, there's always, these are big and demanding roles, but they're also really fun and exciting. And there are ways to make them work. When I first started as an IT director, I was a single parent. And actually I was a single parent when I was my first CIO job as well. And I missed a board meeting once because, well, I missed like most of a board meeting once. I came to the first 20 minutes and then I told the board members, I gotta go. It's like Christmas recital at my kindergartner's, thing. And he's gonna be disappointed if mom isn't there. And they understood, their parents and grandparents. So there are ways to make it work. And I think in higher education in particular, it's a little bit more forgiving than maybe corporate is in that regard. And so there are ways that you can balance those two things.
And just one more follow-up question. Have you felt like, I know that at least when I started first working in higher ed, there were a lot of white men leading the teams at all of the higher education institutions that I worked at.
Yeah.
Did you find it hard for your voice to be heard?
I have a really loud voice. So
okay, so I'm getting a message. I deserve this, every woman out there. I deserve this. Speak loudly, and come up with projects that are going to change or move the needle at the institution or the organization you're at, so that you become valuable.
I mean, there are still a lot of white cis men in leadership roles, and there's a lot of us doing a lot of work to try to beat the drum of diversity and inclusion. But yeah, it can be challenging, of course, but that's, I think, again, where sponsors, mentors, and being unapologetic comes in. It's not always easy, but it is always important to say your piece.
So I wouldn't be LinkedIn Learning if I didn't come up with a little bit of data before I get into the heart of what I really want to talk about with Rae. Thanks, Rae, for kind of giving us a little overview of your career history and how in your strategy. This year, institutions realized the importance and value of technology in their environments. When the whole world came to a halt in mid-March, CIOs and their teams were there to save the day and lead the way as institutions transitioned to completely online instruction in a matter of weeks. And they continue to lead into the fall and the spring. And it looks like we're really talking about what's going to be happening in the fall of next year. Right. Given the stress and chaos of the year, many leaders may be tempted to want to retreat and return to normal. And in fact, the data shows it. When 418 presidents were asked, how will your institution respond to COVID-19? Over half the schools in the fall are going to return to some form of the pre-COVID-19 scenario, or what I would call a quasi back to normal position. Big transformative change just wasn't the main choice for most of the presidents and chancellors out there. The good news is that there were only about 3% of the institutions who actually thought they'd have to shrink or deal with the budget issues.
Lori, this is only 20% are returning to normal. Did you mix up the?
Well, because the 34% is really just looking at how can we achieve what we're really good at, kind of our legacy. The 44% is really the only 44% said, I'll really take a deep look and think, what does this institution need to look like in the future? The 34 is what I call the middle answer, kind of a politically correct answer. We're going to look at what we do really well and try to do it better in the future and go back, So I clumped them together because I found that the 34 is what you would say to your communications director, the 34%. I was more struck by the 44%, less than half, saying I'm going to really take a hard, deep look at myself. So it may be tempting for CIOs to want to retreat and return to normal, but Rae, as you've proclaimed to me, do the opposite. Stand your position, be the agent of permanent change. And after reading your essay back in December, January of this year, titled 5 Priorities for the Higher Ed CIO's 2021 Agenda, that's when I knew I wanted to interview you. And so 6 months later, the discussion about what senior or executive leadership on campus will look like post-pandemic is more important than ever. You have some clear ideas, which, as you can tell from our initial introduction of Rae, she's got a loud voice, on what those priorities are. Will you lead us through those 5 ideas one by one, why they matter, and what kind of behaviors are required to be an agent of change?
Sure. So when this was a blog post I did, I think it was in December, and it was really thinking about 2021. EDUCAUSE had just released their their annual priorities as they do. And of course, security and things like that were on there. And what I argued is that those are important, but they're also sort of table stakes for IT leaders at this point. We're always going to have to deal with security. You're always going to be dealing with, I don't know, technology modernization and staffing and those types of things. And really, we need to think sort of beyond that and look at what we've gone through or what CIOs have gone through over the last, I think, about year at that point, and think about how that changes us for the future. So the 5 priorities that I articulate or that I lay out are, the first one is business leadership. And this is something that CIOs have been talking about for a long time. It's about that seat at the table, and it's about being a general institutional leader, not just a technology leader. And so I think what I say, and I haven't read it recently, but probably should have. But I think what I say is basically we have to be business leaders first, right? Like when the CFO is at the table, they're not only talking about numbers, but oftentimes when the CIO is at the table, we only sort of weigh in when there's a technology discussion or when we can add input about how technology could support and enable a particular change or a business model or something like that. But we have a wealth of knowledge and understanding of the entire institution. In fact, I would argue better than any other leader, except maybe the president, who sits across everything, because so many of the other verticals are in fact vertical. And so I think we can be thinking about and talking about, you know, what does our academic program look like, and what does the business model look like, and how do we change, you know, how we engage with students and all those things. So that was the first priority. The second priority I talk about is technological stewardship. And oh, good. You've got cues for me. And so, you know, this is really changing from how might we to should we, right? And thinking about the technologies that we're introducing critically in a way that maybe we haven't thought about before. And I've had some disagreements with my peers, or now former peers, other CIOs, about the CIO's role related to technological stewardship, because some would argue that our job is to simply enable and empower our constituencies with the best technology and possible. But if they want to do something, then our job is to help them find a way to do that. And I think that we have a responsibility, especially in this day and age, to think even more critically about should we even be doing that. And the example that I'll give is around online proctoring, because that is a very sensitive subject, and it was very prevalent in the pandemic over the course of the last year plus, probably will continue to be so as we move into more hybrid and online learning models. And I think there's a very reasonable question about whether institutions should be doing this. So some CIOs would say that's not my job, right? That's an academic decision. But I think we need to be bringing to the table these conversations and these questions about the ethics and the privacy and the impact to students when we use technologies like this. The third thing that I argue is that we need to have a laser focus on experience. So, our institutions, you know, as we all know, are incredibly siloed. There's somebody who owns the, you know, the recruitment to admission stage, and then there's the academic portion of the student experience, and then there's the outside of academics, the student life portion, right? So the non-academic portion of their experience. And then of course, if they graduate, then there's the alumni experience. And very few institutions are looking across all that and have, you know, what I would say is like a chief experience officer that's really looking at that end-to-end journey of a student and thinking about how to map that experience and how to really impact that experience. So this is an area I think that institutions are going to be moving into. I think a CIO can play a really interesting role in this area. And it's not just students either, thinking about employees. And I know, Lori, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the change in what employees want from their workplaces. But, you know, even institutions that are doing something around this in any form or fashion for students haven't touched their employees yet. And I think institutions are really going to have to think more competitively about how they engage and retain employees. And employee experience, end-to-end employee experience could be a huge piece of that. The fourth thing, yeah.
Wait, before you go to the fourth one, because I think this one's super important, and it's certainly something that we at LinkedIn Learning are always thinking about. It's top of mind for us. It's probably number one for us, actually. we really believe, and I think you do too, that we should be offering simple, seamless, intuitive experiences that delight customers.
Yeah.
I can honestly say I don't think that's necessarily true for a student or employee. A student who comes to our campus for the first time to try to register, to try to schedule a course, to try to get the health benefits, to get housing, to get all of that, there is a few little my son's going to McGill. I mean, there's a few little orientation sessions, but my son is navigating on his own how to figure out how to be an international student to go to McGill University. And it's actually taking months, Rae, not weeks. So is there really going to be a job called Chief Experience Officer?
Well, we see, I mean, so we know higher education is often behind industry in a lot of ways. And we definitely have seen the chief experience officer rise in industry in the past couple of years. And so I think in the next couple of years, we will see institutions. Look, there's way too many competitive forces for us not to be thinking about it. First of all, institutions are going to have to compete for students' attention and eyeballs and, you know, their dollars because there's I mean, we just look at the changing demographics. If you think about also that the vast majority of students now aren't the 18 to 22-year-old first time in college going student, but they're working adults and they're returning students and they're military and they're single parents and they're non-traditional students. You know, we're much more savvy. I mean, I was a non-traditional student. I went back to college in my 30s and I didn't have time or energy for the challenges of navigating the institution. And I was really fortunate because I worked at the institution that I went to school at. So I could walk into the registrar's office and say, hey, Bob, what's going on? But most students can't do that, right? So I do think that this is going to be a really, really important area for institutions to focus on.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to be called, I mean, here at LinkedIn, it's under the product. I mean, product experience. We consider the library to be a product. I know that people don't necessarily think of the library as a product, but in .com world, that's what that is. But I do think there's a real trend, at least in Silicon Valley, towards systems design. How do we put, you know, lots of different vendors, lots of different experiences together into one set of patterns and experiences? And if we changed it, does it, you know, like, is it got the butterfly effect? If I change this, what does it do over there? And that I don't think higher ed has looked at carefully. I mean, you may be turning a student away simply because they can't figure out how to get a parking spot at your campus. I've had it happen. I've walked on campus and saw someone in tears in a parking lot and said, what's the problem? And he says, I can't find a parking spot. I don't think I can go to my classes today. I mean, that is a sad story to be telling, because the butterfly effect of not, you know, all ready to go, but can't find a place to come to class on the very first day. So I think that's the kind, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just, and we think very much in silos, right? So the registrar might have optimized the experience related to whatever processes the registrar has optimized, but financially.
You might have frozen, Raechelle. Are you still there?
Might not have, or vice. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, good. Yeah, good.
Okay, apologies. So we when we do optimize, when we do have sort of product owners, they tend to be very siloed, right? So it's registrar or financial aid or student, you know, some office in student affairs, maybe disability services or the parking or whatever, and they don't tend to really think about that cross-campus experience from the user, from the student or the employee perspective, and that's where I think the real opportunities lie.
Yeah, I wanted to stay on this one because I think that is one of the biggest issues that I see. And I think it's one of the reasons why IT leaders are being asked to be at the table, because the leadership presidents and chancellors realize that you can't just buy things and make them work. You have to make it work for what that culture is going to be like on that campus. Okay, now I'm going to let you go on to number 4.
So number 4 is really about organizational development. And certainly there has been, you know, the idea of the IT org and modernizing the IT org has been, and staffing, staff retention, staff development has been on the top list for a long time. What I think is going to be different in the future is that we're going to have to think about building a very different team, where management by walking around is no longer management by walking around. It is management by zooming around, or by slacking, or by, pick your word here, teams. And so how do we start to think about developing our leaders differently? Because, it's a very different style of management to be able to manage in a much more hybrid, remote work environment. So we have to think about our leadership development differently. We have to think about how we create inclusive environments online, which is different than creating inclusive environments in person. We have to think about what happens when some of our staff are in the office and out of the office, and even things like meetings. So many of us have had the employee or two who worked remotely, maybe permanently or part-time, and their experience was always so much worse than the in-person experience, right? Because somebody had like put up a webcam and like a laptop and hold it up for the company meeting, and they're like, what, I can't hear, huh? And so they're on mute and they can't really participate. So how do we start designing meetings and our entire environment so that nobody feels like they're kind of the second class citizen in that environment, and everybody's equal and everybody can participate? So I think this is going to be huge for CIOs this year and in the coming years.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly important in public state systems. I mean, think about it. Traditionally, at least in California, the larger schools like Santa Monica City College or Pasadena City College or Orange Coast College got more attention, more dollars, had more power, but left some of our rural California colleges not getting at. Now, with our ability to communicate to everybody, to deliver to everybody, there shouldn't, if we're talking about equity, we should be able to operate with the same level of training, the same, as you said, team management for any school in the system, that it shouldn't be bastard children or rural children, or a divide between urban versus rural. I'm pretty keen on that one. The other trend, and I don't know if you've noticed it, but I've seen a real pickup, at least in the companies that I'm working at and the schools that I'm working at, paying attention to well-being, which I don't ever remember well-being being 20 years ago. Nobody ever asked me about my well-being. And I think it's very interesting because I think it has to do with, it's a psychological behavior. It's about people are more productive if they have a sense of well-being. And that people hadn't considered that. They thought it was all about productivity. Did the checklist get checked? So I think that's one key thing that I'm seeing that's really different. Adjusting expectations according to the stress of the team or the challenges facing the team. That's certainly a new trend, I think.
I think it is. So what's really interesting, and I know that you kind of highlight this at some point, that I talk about change, that this change being precarious, and well-being is one of those things that I think is really critically important. And definitely I've talked to CIOs over the last year who've said, man, I have never asked my people so many times, like, how are they doing? Like, how are they feeling? Right? Those types of things, because we've suddenly recognized that it's not just like, hey, Frank, what's going on with the server today? But it's like, how are you, like you personally? But the other thing that we know is that generationally, this is something that's really important to Gen Zers, the notion of well-being, and that companies have a responsibility, companies, which I would say including universities as employers, have a responsibility to care for the well-being, provide mental health services and other sorts of amenities that are related to well-being. And so as we as leaders think about bringing in new people into our workforce, right, it's millennials and Gen Zs that are hitting the workforce now, we also have to be thinking about how do we start adapting our cultures to be more inclusive of these generations' needs as well. So I think it's something that was kind of brought on by the pandemic, but it's also an important part of some sort of the generational work style as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest, best changes I've seen, because I think it does have a lot to do with people's motivation. And I think at both higher ed institutions and in corporates, we're seeing that there's less churn when that is paid attention to.
Yeah.
So this is your turn, audience. There's kind of mutiny happening right now on many campuses as the leadership decides to bring the campus back to in quotes, normal. The IT teams want a choice. They had learned they can be productive, and now they are questioning the return to the same old schedule on campus, in person, in office, and all those processes that accompany it. We want you all to be a part of this conversation. So in chat, you could let us know your thoughts on this topic of remote, hybrid, in person on your campus, and what those thoughts are. While you're doing that, I wanted to give you, we had done internally at LinkedIn a poll, and this is across corporate and higher ed, that 48% of the people are going to continue to have remote work. Companies are allowing remote work. We're particularly seeing it in companies. I don't know what the trend is only in higher ed, but I can tell you that this is a pretty big change for a lot of companies. Even companies like Google, who thought they couldn't be creative without everybody on campus eating together, talking to each other in the hallways, are considering that every employee should have at least 20%, maybe 30% time to have a choice here. When polled about this on LinkedIn, 81% really enjoy working remotely. A lot of people liked it. I know even on my team, some people loved coming into work and thought it would be horrible, and now they have a different viewpoint of it. And then for many people in my team that were starting families and were having issues with school and children and managing their families without grandparents, without caregivers, this working remotely gave them bandwidth to adjust and to do their work and still take care of their families. And then finally, 62% of everyone we polled prefer jobs where they can work remotely. It may be for universities that the only way they're going to get people is by offering this, that it'll be part of one of the benefits of getting work. So Anna, what have you seen out there in our chat?
Yes, so I'm showing that we have at least one participant who will still be remote, but the majority of our comments here are saying that there's a preference towards hybrid. Specifically, we have a comment here that ideally 2 days on campus, 3 days off. We have a few more comments coming in that they'll be on a hybrid experience. So about 60% on-site, 40% remote, with some exceptions, of course. So that seems to be the trend here, is a little bit of a hybrid, still some remote work.
So Rae, don't you think that's another big sea change? That's something that traditionally, you know, institutions have their bubble, and everyone's in the bubble.
Institutions have been, you know, historically, except for the ones, of course, who were predominantly online, but have historically been their own little cities, right? I mean, they have their own housing, they have their own, I mean, everybody's there face to face and participating in that environment. What we are seeing is that from a workforce perspective, what you're showing here, that lots of people are like, like I wouldn't mind giving up my commute. I mean, personally, like I can't imagine commuting again. If I had to go back to commuting, I don't know what I would do. I don't think I would like that at all. And so we're seeing employees thinking about, you know, I don't really love commuting. And so while there are benefits to being face-to-face, I'd like this more hybrid, you know, sort of flexible environment. We also see institutions, or at least leaders, I don't know institutions, I'm going to rephrase that. We see leaders, especially IT leaders, who've had a really hard time competing for talent, thinking, you know what, this might be a way for me to expand my base of talent, to diversify my workforce, to be able to tap into pools of diverse workers who aren't maybe, you know, regionally based. So if I live and work in, you know, a small Midwestern, predominantly white town, I don't have access to workforce that is more diverse. But from an institutional perspective, we aren't seeing, and this is somewhat anecdotal, I don't know that I have hard data on it, but certainly from all the institutions and CIOs and leaders that I've talked to, a good chunk of them are still kind of struggling with how to do this in a meaningful way. And we definitely see some that are calling all their employees back. You know, maybe not initially, maybe it's still like in the fall, you'll be hybrid, but eventually there's an expectation that everybody will be back on campus. So I think institutions are still trying to work out what this really looks like and is for their campuses and what that might change about how their campuses operate.
Well, that's to me, that's really the heart of it. They've shown what agility and flexibility they can have. I mean, traditionally higher ed has had feet of clay. Things don't change except every 500 years. And going back to the early days in England when the monks were all reading books out loud to people, it's just showing, can they continue to support this idea of flexibility, adaptability? To me, it's like, can they adjust? Because what you're talking about is, we do it all the time at LinkedIn. We do it at many, many companies. Let's try this and see. If it doesn't work, we can change our minds. But you find that in higher ed, that is a harder decision. They almost always act as though decisions are forever. They don't like to change their mind. That's one of my pet peeves with higher ed. It's very difficult to get minds changed. Anyway, let's go to number 5, which is really the heart and crux of what we're talking about today. Rae and I are both, if you met Rae and I at a coffee shop, you'd know that we're a little bit snarky. And we really hate it when people use words that make them sound good but have no meaning. And this is one of the ones, this is one of my pet peeves, is digital transformation. It's probably been in Google. If you searched it on Google, it probably has billions of uses this year. But Rae, you've got a different point of view on this one.
So, and this might be a little bit semantics. I'm not going to lie. You know, part of me is just trying to poke the bear just to poke the bear, but I am really tired of hearing about digital transformation. And I say this as somebody who actually wrote it into one of my IT vision statements, like when I was a CIO. So it's not like I was always opposed to the idea. But the thing that I see is a transformation. If you actually look at transformation definitionally, it's really metamorphosis, right? So it's caterpillar into butterfly. It's something that was one thing and is something different, entirely different when it gets out. It also has this sort of connotation of like a defined period of time, right? It starts here, it ends here, and it's done. And I just don't like that idea for higher education. One, I don't think most education institutions are really going to transform at that kind of business model operational level. I think they're much more going to evolve. And in some sense, I think they should evolve. Maybe not on the horizon of evolution. So like, let's not do this generationally. Let's try to do it in the next couple of years and then every year after that. But this idea of sort of constant change and evolution and adaptation, I think is a much better sort of way to think about how to be digital institutions than the idea of this kind of fixed Big Bang transformation.
Yeah, when I read your article, I had this digital transformation. I had this idea of like a Harry Potter on a campus with a magic wand making ping, I'll check that, ping, that'll be okay. Whereas in fact, it's way more like the movie Baby Steps, where you just take a lot of baby steps and hope that you get closer and closer to the goals you want, and that you start small to achieve big. You know, it's not always poof, you know. So
right. Well, and also the idea that change is, you know, they say the only thing that's constant is change, right? And so to your point about decisions on institutions on campuses feeling like they're permanent, I think we as organizations need to be much more sort of in this constant change or this constant evolutionary state. And so you know, helping campuses and organizations get used to that idea that things are always going to kind of change, and they don't have to be huge, like transformative, innovative, you know, things, but they're always going to be, you know, we're going to tweak, we're going to improve it. You know, also the idea of continuous improvement, right? Like we're going to constantly be doing that because we don't really know what the future is going to hold. I mean, if we all went back to November 2019, could any of us predicted, you know, what happened in March of 2020 would have happened? I mean, it sort of came out of the blue, except for maybe some futurists could have told us that this could happen. But, you know, but we don't know what's around the next corner. And so we always have to be much more flexible and adaptable and evolutionary to continue to thrive versus transformational.
And I think another point that you make in that, it doesn't mean that you kill innovation by taking a different approach or process. You know, one of the early leaders at lynda.com said to me, I am clear with the goals and the values of this company, but I don't make a decision to change something unless it's going amok, Lori. The last thing I want to do is change it if it's going fine. So I'm careful about when I make a big decision to make sure it's because it's needed, not because it's just a whim. And I thought that, I found that very valuable information, that often what we really need are really clear objectives and goals that we keep in the back of our mind, like back in our reptilian brain, just inching toward that. That's my purpose. That's what I'm here on this campus to do. I found that really helpful. I'm going to ask another question, because this is one that Rae poses to everyone she meets. Consider this theory of evolution versus the Big Bang. Technology is often an overlay, an afterthought. In chat, let us know your thoughts. How do we move from a binary thinking, yes, it's right, no, it's wrong, to creating an environment where digital technologies, capabilities, and experiences are seamlessly woven into organization? How do we make it part of the DNA? Rae says it's sort of like taking care of a living organism. You want to give some, and then while you're writing that in chat, I'm going to get to Rae on this. I found this a very provocative statement: change out of necessity. It's precarious. And I did come up with, I thought, a very good precarious image for this particular slide.
That is very precarious.
What do you mean by that statement? What does that mean? What's the impact there, or the idea, the thunk?
So if we just think about our personal lives, right, when we make changes because we absolutely have to, it's driven by an external force, and we haven't sort of found that intrinsic kind of motivation or desire for change. So if you think about the person who has the heart attack, who has to suddenly stop eating salt, or whatever it is that is sort of forced upon us. And that's really what happened to higher education, and really to the whole world, a year plus ago, which is that we had this change forced upon us. Yes, everybody went online, everybody did remote learning, they had to, but it wasn't, as the previous sort of question or statement said, it wasn't this thing that was baked into the DNA that the institution really decided intentionally, purposefully, or even quickly that it really wanted to do. It was something that was forced upon it, which makes it very precarious for it to stick, right? Because our natural inclination as human beings and as organizations is to go back to what's comfortable, what's familiar, what we desire. And so we have to move from this sort of necessity-driven change state to a really intentional state around change. And so what I would hope, and what I see some institutions doing, so I think it's really good, is looking at the things that happened during COVID and saying, what of this do we need to adopt full time, and how do we do that? How do we go through those sort of change management processes and those organizational development processes so that we as a culture have embraced this, and it wasn't just sort of hoisted or forced upon us, and we find ourselves here, but everything in the organization is sort of fighting to, I like to say higher ed's really good at reverting back to the mean, right? Like it wants to come back to where it's comfortable and where it knows. But I don't think that's I think we're all wired that way. We all kind of want to come back to what's comfortable. So we have to find that intrinsic motivation to actually make those changes. And to do that, that involves more than just, saying it so, the Harry Potter wand, right? We're not waving our wand and making it so. We actually have to do the hard work and the heavy lifting of bringing people along in that process and helping our staff, our employees, our faculty, our students, our alums, our leaders, whoever, really understand and embrace that change.
Yeah, and I think what's good out of this pandemic is we have gotten more comfortable with change. Change is basically the big barrier in change is a fear of unknown, right? I'm going to end up in a worse spot than I'm currently in. Right. I've been in bad relationships because I was afraid to get out of them, even though it would have been better for me. I mean, that is the fear of change, right? You just stick to your guns on something. And I think though, it's a little bit like exercising part of your brain. Now that we've done so much of it, I think we're feeling like that's more acceptable than it was maybe a year and a half ago. And
I don't agree.
You think we're right back to the lane? Maybe I'm just one of those people who likes change a little more.
Yeah. So I think when my experience with change in higher education as somebody who led a lot of change was that you got to the point of change fatigue where people were like, I'm exhausted, all these things are changing, there's big changes, there's little changes, and I'm tired of change. Like I'm just waiting for it to stop, right? When are the changes going to stop? And I think the pandemic, again, because it's this big externally, sort of hoisted change upon us, I think people are, and now there's some gradual reentry, and, I think folks are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable. Vaccinations are here. I think people are breathing a sigh of relief, but I don't know that it has caused us to be any more accepting of change. That cycle of like things are just going to constantly change, I find is a very foreign cycle in higher education. And you have to do a lot of really hard work to get people to even appreciate that, much less accept it.
I think change
much
is
less
hard
embrace
work.
it. Change is hard work.
It's really hard work. Change is hard. And it's kind of, but it's necessary. It's really, really hard. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to open up to the Q&A now, Anna, and I'd love to, we're at that point where I feel like Rae's kind of shown what she's all about, and we can hear from our attendees about what they'd like to hear from Rae.
Sure thing. And thanks everybody. We have some good comments in the chat here. With the Q&A, I was noticing a couple themes to the question. The first was about point number 3, maintaining a laser focus on the experience. So the first question is, what practical advice would you give to CIOs seeking to change the campus culture to focus more on the student experience, for example, inside the senior leadership team?
Oh, that's such a good question. So, I think that's a great question. One of the things that's really important, and I think Lori mentioned this earlier, is that kind of starting small and taking small steps, right? So we tend to want to, like, student experience, really important, let's boil the ocean, like, don't do that. But think about one sort of end-to-end, process or journey, and really kind of map the student experience, across that particular journey, and think about how, the ways in which you can change it. So a couple of points here, right? Start with one specific thing. A pain point is really important. And if it's especially a pain point for not just for the students, but for the faculty or staff who are also involved in the process, you're more likely to get some buy-in about making the change, right? Because it's painful for them too. The second is engage your stakeholders in that process so that it's not like, hey, I did this thing and look, it could be so much better, but actually get them working and thinking and understanding it. Use design thinking techniques. So go and actually observe the student behavior, and so that you can, so that you're really, creating that empathy and understanding what that experience is. What I found doing some of this work in institutions is that there's like really no understanding of how horrific this experience is. It's like, well, it's fine, it's you just do X, Y, Z, you click these 3 things and it's all good. And when you put people in the shoes of the person actually doing it, it really, really fundamentally changes that perspective. So I think that can be really important. And then figuring out ways to create wins, and make people, so that's where the pain comes in. If you can solve for pain points, creating something that's a win, because what you want is that snowball effect. You want one thing to have been successful. If you try to tick off too many things, either they don't go anywhere, or they're not all successful. So you want something to be successful. You want to create some champions, you want to create some buy-in, and you want to parlay that into the next thing, and then the next thing, and then all of a sudden you create this much bigger kind of snowball effect. Does that answer the question?
Good. Yeah, and I think it speaks to a really important thing in design thinking, which is to observe your user. I found sometimes bringing in a 60-second video of the pain point that someone's experienced, an actual recording of that, you've got everybody's attention. Looking for ways to not confront people, but to get them to coalesce around an idea and to use all the intelligence that they have and their experience and strategy to address these things, rather than creating wars of over space, over dollars, over divisions, over, what is my job title? Anna, any more questions?
Yes, we have a couple more. In the same theme, we had a question here about if there's anything you can share in regards to the latest research or data specific to what higher education employees want or need out of this employee experience.
Ooh, I don't have any research on it, although many institutions actually do some kind of employee, so they either do like an employee version of the NESI, which is a student, sort of a broad survey, but they do an internal version of it, or they do like a great places to work, or one of those types of things that starts to get, climate surveys. Thank you. I just saw my friend Keith McIntosh post that. So climate, you do some kind of campus climate survey. So institutions often have some of that data, but the example that I will give, is just, if you even think about something as simple as the onboarding experience at most institutions. And there is a great book, it's by the Heath brothers. I'm trying to think what it's called. It's like Great Moments That Stick, something like that. Power of Moments. But they give a really interesting example from the John Deere company about that onboarding experience and how we as organizations haven't done this great job of like how we think about these intentional moments. And think about that from the employee experience, right? So often staff in universities feel like second-class citizens. So there are things that we do that preference faculty over staff. There are, differential treatments, there are differential benefits. So again, the same thing that we would do for a student, which is really looking intentionally at what is that whole, what is the arc of that life cycle, that arc of that journey, and how do we, act much more intentionally and create these powerful moments for our employees, I think is going to be really important, because we know, so I can't speak for the whole of the institution, but I certainly know in the IT arena that there is a huge problem with workforce, right? We're challenged to find employees at what we're willing to pay, where we happen to be located. And so certainly remote work could help with that. There's got to be more work on the technology itself. So we're bringing in modern technologies and utilizing modern skill sets, but also thinking about how we create a really amazing environment where people just really want to work, I think is also an important piece of that.
Anna, we got one last one.
Sure. So we had a question here. Which do you think is more difficult, managing people or managing data?
Oh, it depends who you are, I would imagine. People are unpredictable, but data is everywhere. So in institutions, and everybody has their little secret stash of data in institutions as well, right? It's like in their separate access database, and it's under somebody's table, and it's all sorts of different places. Both are interesting challenges in education, but I don't know. I would say that managing people is more rewarding than managing data, but I don't know which is more difficult. I suspect it depends who you are.
That was my problem in higher ed, is that the data got lost in pockets. It was never there when you needed it at the time it could have made a difference in your behaviors or choices. Telling me what my students did in an LMS at the end of the semester would have been so much more helpful during the middle of the semester. But those reports weren't generated until summer or something like that. I mean, that kind of craziness was always just flipped me out all the time in higher ed.
Well, and there's not always agreement on what it means, right? So you can ask 4 different people at an institution, what the FTE is, and you can get 4 different answers, and everybody has a different definition of what a student FTE is. So yeah, data management is not easy, but people are people.
So this is my last question for you, Rae, before we close out today, because we are all in the midst of change. What's on your list for personal goals as you look towards the future?
Well, I'm starting a new job soon, so I think it's, there's going to be something related to that. A couple of the things I've really been focusing on are diversity and inclusion. And I saw that some of my friends are on this webinar. So I know that, I've got other DEI champions around with me, but it's an area where I feel like we can never stop learning. And so I just completed a DEI certificate program. I think inclusion, as I said, organizational development is going to be really key for leaders. It always is, but I think especially now it's a paradigm shift around how we lead. And so I think an important part of that is going to be about how we create inclusive environments in this new hybrid, digital, remote type of environment. And so that's an area that I'm really focused on, is how do I lead differently and more inclusively in a hybrid and a digital world. So that would be probably top of mind for me right now.
I'm with you on that one. My two personal is access. I've been working on universal broadband and access to whatever technology that we need, and access to the people to support you that you need. It's not always digital. Yep. And then my second thing is I've been working tirelessly, everyone here at LinkedIn, we've all got a call to help others outside of our networks. And my way of doing that has been helping students who are graduating during COVID, that you can find work, and that we're here to help you find work, that your degree does mean something. Thank you so much, Rae. Thank you. I could talk to Rae for hours. She's so much fun. She's so bright. It's got such great insight and so much heart and warmth and empathy. There are plenty of courses on the LinkedIn Learning Library. This is my shameless plug part, relevant to today's topic. There's no reason not all of us. I mean, I just had a great conversation with a university system that said, we're training everybody to be a leader on this campus. We think it's part of their role. It should be part, to use Rae's word, part of their DNA. And if they feel like leaders, they will speak out, and they won't go silent, and we'll see a different behavior. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time at the Higher Education Leaders event on June 10th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time, titled Schools in a Time of Crisis. We're Not Disrupted Enough, with Will Richardson. He says, what does the future of education look like? Technology has delivered the curriculum, but has anything really changed? Asks Will. The pandemic is a huge disruption, regardless if we're in healthcare, business, politics, service, or education. We're experiencing a profound moment of deep professional learning. Educators are literally and have been learning their way through this crisis. Such conditions require powerful learning, a deeper engagement in meaningful real-world problem solving that is driven by questions, intense collaboration, and meeting challenges in a productive ways. No one is doing this for a grade. The goal is to serve students under exceedingly difficult circumstances. Will has been leading teams of educators, both here in the United States and for 40 weeks in the European Union, to answer these very questions. I'm looking forward to seeing what he's found out, what he knows. And to Rae's point, a lot of them are very fatigued by all the change, a little bit overwhelmed by all of this. So for all of our future and past events, we have on-demand recordings. You can go to highereducationleaders.splashthat.com. And just to let you know, the HED Leader webinar series will be taking a break in August. So if you want to, our last two are coming up, the one in June and July, and that we'll be back in September with a full lineup for the entire school year. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Rae. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori. I appreciate it.